And if there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it.
Let me be clear. I never had meetings with Russian operatives or Russian intermediaries about the Trump campaign. That is the question I responded to. I did not respond by referring to the two meetings, one very brief after a speech, and one with two of my senior staffers, professional staffers, with the Russian ambassador in Washington, where no such things were discussed. My reply to the question of Senator Franken was honest and correct. I have recused myself in the matters that deal with the Trump campaign.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions recusing himself as this investigation continues at the Justice Department, the FBI. Of course, there are investigations in the House and Senate Intelligence Committee as well about possible contacts or even collusion with the Russians before the election with the Trump campaign. A lot of pushback on this from Republicans, but we are getting word of meetings that the White House put out now saying that then NSA-to-be, National Security Advisor-to-be, Michael Flynn, met with Ambassador Kislyak. There you see the second person, that's the Russian ambassador. Also, Jared Kushner met with the Russian ambassador in that same meeting. And then, obviously, you're hearing about the Attorney General's meeting. He was a senator back then in September, a one-on-one meeting and another group meeting. This has caused quite a stir here in Washington. And from Sessions, after his testimony, he also received a questionnaire from Senator Leahy in which he was asked specifically a written questionnaire about Russian ties and have you been in contact with anyone connected to any part of the Russian government about the 2016 election, either before or after Election Day, and his response, as you see there, is no. So, what about all of this? Let's bring in our panel. Charles Lane, opinion writer for The Washington Post. Katie Pavlich, news editor at townhall.com. And Chris Stirewalt is politics editor here at Fox News. Katie, your thoughts on this? There are some people who are saying this is heads are exploding and people are going, way over on this thing. And others are saying, wait a second, maybe he didn't tell the truth in that statement.
The heads exploding, unfortunately, seems to be a normal practice when it comes to responding to stories about Russia and President Trump. Look, the White House is clearly putting out more information about meetings with the Russian ambassador to try and show that this is a normal process that took place during the transition with members of the campaign as part of a normal way to reach new relations with Russia. When you look at the details of the question that Senator Franken asked, he himself keeps saying, this is brand new information. If this is true, if there is evidence. So far, after months of reporting on this issue, we have seen no evidence that there is any wrongdoing here. These seem like normal meetings. There's information about meetings that were held, and yes, some of them maybe weren't disclosed, but there's no information about wrongdoing, and these seem to be just normal processes. And yes, Senator Sessions, Attorney General Sessions now, could have saved himself a lot of trouble today by simply following up on that question and saying, well, in my capacity as the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I did have this meeting. But in terms of this being some kind of out of the ordinary issue when he met with dozens of ambassadors last year, seems to be overblown.
Chris, I get all these tweets and Facebook posts about, why are you covering it? It's fake news. There's not there. But, I mean, you did have the Attorney General recuse himself today. It is news. And there is that question about, why doesn't he remember that meeting in September when Russia is in the forefront of the election news at that moment? And why doesn't he clean it up afterwards and say, you know what, I forgot about this meeting. I met with the ambassador.
Well, first of all, never check the mentions. This is not a day to check your mentions. Just don't do it. Look, on the issue of Russia, the Trump administration has to be cleaner than Caesar's wife. There is no room for error anymore because they've had a couple of oopsies, right? We had the Flynn oops, we had the Paul Manafort, we had Carter Page, there's this concatenation, and to Katie's point, There's no allegation that they colluded with the Russians to hack or disseminate the hacked material from the Democratic campaign email accounts. There's no allegation of any wrongdoing. But when you get enough stinkaroonies in a row, then you say, and this is what the president essentially has to say, whether he uses the means of a special counsel or whatever he does. He says, no more mistakes on Russia. We're not going to, this administration cannot afford any more mistakes on Russia because it feeds into the Democratic narrative that he is a puppet and that the election was stolen, so they just can't screw up anymore.
I know, but you open the door to a special counsel and then it opens a lot of doors, as we've seen many times before.
Well, look, either take a special counsel now, find a trusted person that you believe will execute a fair-minded inquiry, have it over with, or you could end up with a special prosecutor. You could end up with real terror at the end of this thing. They have to, whether it's through a special counsel or whatever means they take, they have to clean house and be done.
Just for people at home, explain the difference. One would be the White House reaching out to say some independent look at this to kind of collaborate everything, right. And the other is Congress initiated and
court-ordered and
Ken Starr finds out something else.
You start out with a land deal in Arkansas and you end up with Monica Lewinsky's Gap dress, and things get out of hand quickly. If you pick somebody, and I today suggested somebody like Tom Ridge or Kelly Ayotte, former senator from New Hampshire, somebody that has credibility on both sides of the aisle, you come in and say, check us out and tell us what you find.
Chuck.
Well, good luck in the current environment finding anybody who has what you call credibility on both sides of the aisle. I mean, I don't think we live in such a world anymore, and that's part of our problem, is that whatever the truth is here, there's really nobody who's viewed as an honest broker for finding it out. On Jeff Sessions, he said, let me be clear. He doesn't seem capable of making himself very clear on this issue, and that's where all the problems started. This whole exchange with Al Franken has me completely baffled in terms of just the aptitude of Jeff Sessions, who should know better. He was asked a hypothetical question. If such and such is true, what would you do? The only thing you say in response to a hypothetical question, especially if you're under oath, is, I can't answer hypothetical questions.
He clearly screwed up the answer, but
yeah.
he didn't clean it up.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but what about the overall? The fact that we don't have any fire yet, and everybody's chasing smoke. Do you know how many reporters the Washington Post has on the Russia story?
Not personally, but
I think it's like 10.
Well, you have better sources at the Post than I do. To be serious about it for a minute, it would be a pretty big deal if there had been any kind of even pretty arm's-length cooperation or, intermingling between a U.S. presidential candidate and a foreign government like Russia.
Right.
I think, and there's all these meetings that, we just discovered another one today. So it does seem like it's worth the effort to find it out.
Right. But I guess what I'm pointing to is what we know so far, and that is the intelligence community does this scrub before they leave in November and December. This is CIA Director Brennan, DNI Clapper, and let's play Paul Ryan. This is SOT 5.
They did an investigation, intelligence community-wide. Many of us went down and got the briefings from Clapper and Brennan after the election, before the inauguration, and never have we ever seen any evidence presented to us that an American or a person in the Trump campaign was involved or working with the Russians.
So at what point, obviously these investigations continue, but there has to be a clearing of the deck, otherwise it continues in eternity.
Well, and I think it goes back to what Chris said about the president being able to sit everyone down and say there will be no more mistakes on this issue. And actually the president making a very clear statement about how the Russians do not have the best interest in mind when it comes to U.S. elections. The conclusion from the intelligence report that was made was there were no votes changed, but there was a Russian propaganda campaign waged against the United States in order to undercut our faith in democracy. They're doing it now in Europe.
Don't deny that.
Right.
Paul Ryan starts out with that.
Right. Yes.
And I also think that one thing that they can do as well is try to clean up the timeline here. So when people are saying at the height of the WikiLeaks saga and allegations of Russian interference, yes, that happened when Senator Sessions met with the Russian ambassador in his office. That was on September 8th. But the day before, Senator Sessions also met with the Ukrainian ambassador, and then a week later, they came up with the ceasefire that Russia then accepted. So they were probably there discussing the ceasefire. And it doesn't help that today Attorney General Sessions said he couldn't remember what they talked about. If he could remember those details, he would help himself.
Let's just play SOT 4. We're going to talk about this in the other panel, but let's play SOT 4 here from Sessions today.
I thought he was pretty much of an old style Soviet type. To listen to him, nothing that Russia had done nothing that was wrong in any area, and everybody else was wrong with regard to the Ukraine. It got to be a little bit of a testy conversation at that point. Most of these ambassadors are pretty gossipy, and they liked this was in the campaign season, but I don't recall any specific political discussions. I don't recall having met him before those 2 meetings.
Talking about meeting with the Russian ambassador. We're going to have more about this.